Hey, go Bruins, we actually won a game. Okay, if you're not awake yet, because I know it's still early morning, you will be after this panel's through with you. We're going to be talking about the business of cannabis, banking, investment, branding, what's legal and not legal in the state of California. We've got some terrific people up here who can speak to that, leaders in their field. So let us begin. I want to start by telling you a personal story. Last time I was here, I moderated a panel on a similar topic, and I was asked to come up here because I'm an investor and strategic advisor to a bunch of digital companies throughout Southern California, and one of them was an entity that had just launched called 420 TV, which is, think of it like the HBO for the cannabis culture, and it's global. So there's movies and TV shows and stuff like that that all have a cannabis theme to it. So during that conversation, I don't think I had told this story. I know I told a few, but this was my first foray into anything having to do with cannabis. And so one of the investors in this initiative is the 5th largest grower in the state of California, actually in the country. And he has a facility in Northern California and another one in Nevada. And I was invited out to the facility. We were going to have a strategy session, and being the strategic advisor, I thought, that would be cool. I'll go out there. I'd never been to a plant like that before, no pun intended. So I went out, and this facility was huge. I mean, it is basically marijuana plants as far as the eye could see. And I was getting a tour of, they have little babies, and they have then the plants that are in mid-range, and then the plants that are ready for being picked and processed. So during that, I was sitting in the office of the gentleman who runs this facility, and we were having a conversation about marketing and all this for 420 TV, and 2 ladies come in. And they say, hey, Howard, we need to pay a vendor. They need $3,500. Howard says, excuse me, gentlemen. He got up from the table. There was this huge safe. And I mean, big. And I'm watching him walk over to this safe, do a couple of dials, and he opens it. And I don't know how many millions of dollars real cash was in the safe, but it was millions. He took out what he called a brick, took the wrapper off, counted $3,500, handed it to the 2 ladies and said, go take care of the vendor. And he sat back down. I've never forgot that. That's the world we live in if you're in the cannabis industry. Well, we have some people up here who can talk to this. And I know, Senator Hertzberg, you've got, was Senate Bill 90, is it? 930. 930. So we're going to talk about these things, but that's the world we live in. It's the 21st century, and that's how we're having to deal throughout the country, not just here. So with that, I'd like to introduce each of these panels. I'm actually going to have them do it. If you guys could take like a couple of minutes, I'd like you to talk about who you are, what you do, and then make a general comment from your perspective on what's going on in the state of California as it relates to cannabis, from your opinion, just as kind of an overview statement to kind of set the tone, and then we'll get into some questions. Senator Hertzberg, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Bob Hertzberg. I represent the San Fernando Valley. I used to be Speaker of the California Assembly, and I was chairman of the tax committee that authorized this stuff before the voters did so. And I got to tell you, I'm known for introducing the banking bill, cannabis banking bill last year. And I'm going to reintroduce it with Fiona Ma. Hopefully she'll be the treasurer next year, as soon as I get back to session. And it's one of these things, quite frankly, that frustrates me so much about government. all of us in the digital age are moving at breakneck speed. Our technology with these phones and everything is extraordinary. And it's one of these examples of government being slow and yesterday. And I was just hoping that we had an opportunity to do it right, and we didn't. Here's what happened. I used to form banks in my old days as a young lawyer, and I've been known the business reasonably well. And when I saw some politicians recommending a government bank for cannabis, I just this is crazy. It's never going to get done. The law will change. It'll be 20 years by the time we actually get the regulations and stuff done. So I said, this is not a hard problem to solve. We already have a state banking commissioner. Let's just create a limited charter bank with limited purposes. Let's take a small conservative view of a closed loop system that achieves 4 objectives. 1, allows people to pay their taxes and fees. We were seeing unbelievable budget change proposal requests, costs with respect to the Highway Patrol to guide money, all of these, the safes full of money. A guy comes to my office and says, I got $40 million sitting in a tractor trailer, I don't know what to do with it, right? We had 918 banks in California that had been closed because the banking industry, the number of actual banks around the state is shrinking. 918 of them sitting there with safes ready to go. So why don't we just create a limited charter purpose bank that lets you pay your fees, lets you pay your vendors. I'm somebody who's a plumber. I go out and fix your pipes, so I don't have to get somebody opening a safe. They'll write me a special limited check that's only to be used at that bank. Let's use the money to pay the rent so the landlord's not worried about the 10 vendors that they have and all the problems. And let's let you invest with the state treasurer if you want to get a rate of return. And although I called it a bank, it's really not a bank. It was a cash management system, but I called it a bank because my experience, I've taken a couple companies public. As an entrepreneur, you need to marry new ideas with things that give people comfort, and banks give people comfort. We extended it to credit unions. There's 135 state chartered banks already. We know that all the banks are, they've got spilkas over all this stuff for the Yiddishkops in the room. And so, so let's come up with something simple. If we could create a credit card, if you will, that you can go to the bank, deposit $1,000, then go to the place and buy $100 worth of stuff, whatever you're going to buy at the store, and they'll work it. But a closed loop system. And the key to that closed loop system is, 1, you have private insurance. Talk to companies that desperately want to get into this business, in the insurance business. And 2, you don't use the federal wire. You don't use the normal banking system. So literally, you could create this. It's not a perfect system, and it would be a fee-based system. So it might cost you $3,000 a month to maintain an account and $100 a check. But that's a lot less money, a lot less risk to your employees and the like, and it's an important step. And the idea, in my judgment, is that the estimate is upward, I don't know exactly what it looks like, of $7 billion the next year. I know our tax revenues don't show that, but because taxes are so high, a lot of people aren't complying. And a friend of mine tells me there's $2 billion sitting in barrels buried in Northern California. We got to get it out of those safes. We got to get it safe and be smart about it. And bottom line is, what would happen is, if there's 20 or 30 of these banks and they could do interbanking agreements within their closed loop system, what's going to happen is the big cos, as soon as the stuff becomes legal, and it will, it's just a matter of time, they'll roll them up and buy them because they want those customers. Somebody's got $500–600 million in their account. The big people will buy them. They've already got an institution. And lastly, the idea of making a special limited charter bank would be that all the other banking laws would apply. Fiduciary obligations, auditing procedures, and the like. And one of the things that Fiona cares deeply about is creating records. You don't have any records with just cash and carry. But with checks you could actually create records. So there's a lot of dimension. It has some hair on it, there's no question. A lot of people only see it in the context of banking. There wouldn't be any lending. But the idea was to at least take a toe in the water, be responsible, and with some thoughtful way that's consistent with basic business principles. And I got it through the Senate with almost no votes. I got it through the Assembly all the way to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And the banking commissioner in the governor's office called the appropriations chair and said, hold it. And they said, hold it, because they didn't want to deal with it, because they wanted years for regulation. I said, I'll give you a month. What are you talking about? We got to solve this problem. There's a bunch of problems here. We got to change this attitude of government and bureaucracies of how they're doing it. But they were successful, because that's the deal, the way it works in Sacramento. The governor can pick up the phone and get some deal with the budget appropriations chair to hide up this deal, and then it gets killed, and so I'll reintroduce it again. I literally had a gentleman who was a former CHP officer, a Republican, who was going to jockey the bill on the floor. It's completely bipartisan. Everybody was into it. It was really killed by, in my judgment, don't know 100% for sure, but by the bureaucrats who were fearful of, oh my God, how do I regulate this and what do I do? Get a life, figure it out, or go get another job is my attitude. But we're in a new world order and we've got to respond quickly, and I was pushing like hell to get it done in what was, by everybody's standards, both in the industry and in the banking world. Banking industry wasn't killing me on this. They liked it as an avenue to get to be able to roll up these things and avoid the problems. So it had a lot of traction on a bipartisan basis. I can't remember any co-authors I had, but a ton of them. I don't think I had it more than a couple of no votes in both houses. So we'll be back, and I'm going to push like a son of a gun to get it through as fast as possible and try to make it urgency legislation so it goes into effect immediately upon passage.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Lillian, tell us about what you do on a daily basis.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lillian Conroe. I'm an appointee to the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. I am the Small Business and Permit Specialist for Southern California. And what I do is I work with those businesses that are trying to get their permits, trying to get started, or don't know where to start, and providing all those resource information, especially our small businesses who always feel they're being neglected or they're being left out, or that there are resources that they're not being told about. So I kind of handhold the businesses through the permit process. I started working with the Cannabis, Bureau of Cannabis Control, when it's gone through all those name changes, when they were starting to do the workshops, outreach public workshops. And I had worked with Lori before with alcohol beverage control. So it was interesting to see how the laws were coming about, regulations, and pretty much modeled the same way you need to get a liquor license. We were asked about some of the fees. We talked about how some of the fees might have been too high, and then trying to work with cities to get the permitting process up and going. And it's just that still there's a lot of cities in California that do not allow this business in their cities or county. Some have tried to skirt around the issue. There's some counties now that are putting it on the ballot. There's a lot of county supervisors who said they didn't want it, but now it's gone on the ballot for the voters to vote. It was interesting to see one city, which was Compton. People thought that Compton had put it on the ballot, that it was going to be passed through, and it failed. And it was interesting. Compton sits in the middle of cities around it that's allowing this industry. And my thought was, this product is passing through your city, you're losing all this money. It's going to other cities. It just didn't make sense. So you have these warehouse owners sitting out there in Compton who was waiting for this bill, waiting for the voters to vote for it, because they was ready to just raise their rents, and for the cultivators and the laboratory owners. And when it failed, these warehouses sat empty. So, but what we're also seeing too is a lot of our small manufacturers who are being displaced by this industry, because the warehouse owners or property owners feel they can get more money from the cannabis owners. So we need our small manufacturers. And some of these manufacturers have been in their place for sometimes 20 years, and now they're being told they're not going to renew their lease because they're waiting for the cannabis business to come into those warehouses. I also find or get calls where some of the business owners who are getting retail space in some cities, the property owners are trying to play the game where they're letting you come in, they give you a lease, they raise your rent, and then the cannabis owner is remodeling the space, and then the landlord wants to not renew the lease or try to force them out. And the landlord's thinking is, oh, they have the permits. I don't have to go through the permit process. If I push this person out, I can come in and now be the cannabis business owner because I don't have to pay for these permits. They just don't understand that, yes, you still have to go through the permit process too. But I'm finding some of the cannabis owners who are calling me and having problems with this. And I just tell them, well, look for another location and let the owner think he's going to be able to move into your space with those permits. And when he gets shut down, he'll understand he has to go through the permit process too. So this is what I'm here. I'm here located in Los Angeles. Like I said, I work all of Southern California. And I'm here to work with the business. Just found out that the Employment Development Department is now mandated to work with the cannabis industry and work with the business owner, helping them to do job recruitment, to advertise the jobs, because a lot of cannabis businesses don't know where to go for good quality employees. So now the state has been, employment office has been mandated. I'm getting phone calls from the employment office about, I don't know this industry. So I'm kind of giving them a quick lesson and the types of jobs that are available and how to go by connecting with business owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Jay, what do you do?
Hi, I'm Jay Purcell. I'm an attorney with Clark Newbert. We're a women-owned law firm in Sacramento, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, and Los Angeles. We try and help little cannabis companies become bigger cannabis companies. That's what we do. And every day, a couple of them ask us, how do we get around the banking problem? And we have no advice, because we can't help them evade federal law. We mostly smile and say, you should talk to your colleagues and figure out what they do. It's a huge problem. And I think any solution is better than what's happening today, any solution. So I think the incremental approach is the best approach, because we're not going to get a solution to this challenge of federal and state. We're going to get an improvement. So any improvement is going to be a great one. The problems that we see mostly are without access to banking services, our clients can't pay their taxes. Our clients can't calculate their taxes. Our clients have trouble doing payroll taxes. Our clients have trouble with everything. And in a sense—
Can I just say something? Up until we passed the law this year, we charge your clients an extra 10% when they come in with cash to count their cash. Think about that. We charge you 10% if you come in with cash.
It's this, we call it a second tax because the time and money and risk and brain power they lose every day trying to navigate this is hugely expensive, and it's also really dangerous. The safes with millions of dollars, it's like The Sopranos, it's crazy. and well-meaning people can't count all that money, right? Like, I've worked in retail for a long time. The cash register is never perfect. And we did, thousands of dollars a day at a Starbucks, right? We didn't do tens of millions. The scale of the loss and the seepage and also just the tax revenues, they just kind of go out the door. Right. It's a huge problem. And I generally am disinclined when I hear people talk about government regulating too much. But here, gosh, the absence is a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and it's inhibiting these clients from growing, and it's also letting them grow in ways that aren't great, because without being able to do real audits, without being able to go to an accountant once a year and saying, here are our receipts, please help us file with the feds, please help us file with the state government. It's like, imagine a business before there was a Western Union, right? Like, it's literally like the olden days, but with huge amounts of money, huge amounts of investors who want to get financial statements, who want to have some comfort that the businesses in which they're investing are meeting their tax obligations, like really boring stuff that a lot of these clients who are coming out of a grayish market want to do right, but we just don't have Sacramento's kind of not set up a way for them to do it right, and it's in huge part because of the feds, so it's not just a California problem, but we're hugely excited to see any legislation getting close. Super excited for next year. And
I'll be back.
Yeah, and I think all of our clients want to see any improvement
Yeah.
because the status quo it's dangerous. Yeah.
Thank you. Matt. Tell us about your world, Matt.
I like to think of myself as a little bit of a firefighter because I spend most of my day putting out fires, frantic clients calling me on the phone wondering how to address a problem. But let me tell you a little bit about my biography first. Well, first of all, I have two jobs, really. I'm general counsel for a small pooled Canadian capital corporation. We have about $2 million deployed in the cannabis community, largely in the cannabis industry. It's no longer a community. Largely in California, and I function as general counsel. I do a lot of the due diligence on these corporations. They were largely Canadian investors because at the time that we set this up, there were Canadian investors who recognized that the opportunities to invest in the Canadian market had bypassed them, and they had this tremendous appetite for US investments, and we wanted to be able to provide them with a vehicle for accomplishing that. And my partners happen to be Canadian as well, and we have a few friends and family in the US, and one of the things that I always like to tell them is one of the virtues about investing in a Canadian corporation that's then deploying capital in the US is that the Controlled Substances Act has no extraterritorial effect. Now, the money laundering issues are an entirely different problem, but for instance, what does that mean, that it has no extraterritorial effect? What that means is that if I smoke pot in Canada, well now, let's say in Mexico, the US government can't prosecute me for having violated the law in a foreign country because it has no extraterritorial effect outside the US. So that's one of the hats that I wear. The other hat I wear is I'm of counsel for a small and very prominent Canadian cannabis boutique in New York. I say prominent because I love Mitch Kulik, who's one of the founders of the firm. The firm's name is Feuerstein & Kulik. They're all over the place, and we have one of our clients is here today. Erin, want to raise your hand? And Nicole, is she here? No, not. Okay, so Erin's here today. And we have my work varies. It's everything from representing sick patients who need greater access to care, and because I'm in New York, that's frequently a problem. And it expands all the way to, say, large venture capital firms. For instance, I represented DCM Ventures when they invested about $13 million in Ease a couple of years ago and doing the due diligence. I have, what's funny is that my own political inclinations are somewhat contradictory to my experience in the cannabis industry. On the one hand, as a unabashed, unregenerate liberal, I've always believed in government. I have a somewhat different perspective about the cannabis industry. There are many people here in the cannabis world who want to see federal prohibition lifted as quickly as possible. I have a little bit more of an ambivalent attitude towards it. Yes, I agree with everyone on the panel. I think it's absolutely critical for purposes of banking that we have some kind of safe harbor or safe banking act. One of the companies I worked with for a while called Token was trying to address that problem and was unsuccessful. Despite the fact that they were able to get the necessary KYC and developed a platform to address it, the banks just simply weren't willing to take cannabis companies' money. That is a problem. However, I think it's important that there's another cautionary tale here as well. There is a benefit, a tremendous benefit for small proprietors at this moment, precisely because we have this fragmented industry that we do, because multi-state operators are confined to their territories and jurisdictions. Each state has set up, there is no national cannabis industry in the US. In fact, there's no California cannabis industry. It's a series of small municipal industries, each one of which is discrete and insular and has its own norms and protocols and standard operating procedures, and that's a benefit to some degree. Why is it a benefit? Well, you're starting to already see the consolidation in the industry, right? You're seeing MedMen, you're seeing Cresco, you're seeing a lot of these very large multi-state operators begin to gobble up small people. And I believe in the small independent proprietor. I'm a little idealistic about the cannabis industry. My love for it goes back to, I don't know, visions of the counterculture in the 1960s and small independent proprietors. And if you begin to regulate at the federal level and large cannabis conglomerates can cross state boundaries, you're going to end up squelching a lot of those small businesses. So I think that, yes, there needs to be some type of change at the federal level, but I think we need to be cautious about exactly what we advocate for.
Thanks, Matt. So now we're going to get into an interactive discussion about a number of things. I'm going to ask some questions. This panel is about banking. Obviously, you've heard banking, banking, and more banking. And I'm going to ask the senator a question in a minute. But this is also about investment, and it's about branding. We haven't talked about branding yet because there's a whole slew of issues with that. And I'm going to tell again my own personal story going back to the 420 TV initiative. So on the 420 TV platform, there's a show that was produced by some old friends of mine from HBO called Medical Marijuana Miracles. And it's short vignettes of stories of children, men, women of all shapes, colors, ages that have health issues, whether it's cancer or some other. And this is their personal story. Effectively, the series is about their personal stories of how they're using cannabis to give them comfort. Whether it's not a cure, obviously, but it helps them in their pain or whatever it might be. So I was in a meeting last year with the producers of the show and the 420 TV executive team where they were talking about how Facebook shut them down. I'm going to say it again. Facebook shut them down. Said you cannot promote, brand, or anything having to do with this show. It's false advertising. It was some lower level executive there. I wouldn't even call him an executive. It was some coordinator, some young person who decided that that wasn't legit. I, then being the advisor, have friends at Facebook, so I called my friends higher up the ladder. They didn't want to touch it. They want to touch it. And I've known that this, I had heard stories like this from other companies that had promoted video in such a way that Facebook and others were doing takedowns. So again, from a branding perspective, there's this fear factor that they're going to get sued or that Donald Trump's going to come get them in their bedroom with the Attorney General and pull them out of bed in their pajamas. I don't know what it is, but just I'm going to throw it out to the panel because I know some of you have had similar experiences here. Why don't you talk to your own personal experience with the branding initiative, marketing, from your clients or whatever that has had a similar bent? Anybody?
I can talk about that. So one of the companies that we represent, that we deployed capital in, I don't currently represent them as a lawyer, is a company called Toker. They're located here in Southern California. And I remember the presentation vividly because I walked out of the first presentation. It wasn't even, I hadn't met the guys yet. I said, I want that company right this second. And the reason is because one of the things that you do as a venture capitalist is you start to figure out what the pressure points are in any industry, and you recognize that when there's a company that arises that begins to solve that pressure point, that's something that you covet. And branding and marketing, it was a real problem, and I began to see this many years ago when I was doing work for Ease, is that because you can't obviously cross state boundaries, because the federal government regulates this as a controlled substance, you don't have the traditional First Amendment protections that you would as a commercial enterprise to advertise as you see fit in broadcast medium. So the solution, and I came across this first, this is as sometimes as a lawyer can actually be instructive for you as a venture capitalist, is that I saw that Colorado which recognized that obviously that you had to restrict what cannabis companies could and could not do in advertising medium because of federal law. Nonetheless, there was an exception. If you engaged in something called location-based advertising, you were effectively exempted from all of these advertising restrictions, and that's what Toker does. Now, you may ask, what the hell is location-based advertising? Well, that's because we're American. If you go to Japan, you would know what location-based advertising is, because every time you walked by a store, you'd be hit with an instant message about some type of advertising program. When you went into a department store, there'd be beacons communicating with your smartphone, giving you information about coupons for the item that you just put back onto the rack. So Toker is a much more modest form of this, but it's a platform for brands to be able to communicate with you as the cannabis consumer, to be able to advertise themselves and to develop brand recognition. And I think that if you're looking at the industry in terms of, I like to think of it in terms of an edifice. At least as an investor, I think that the foundation has largely been laid with regard to the operating companies, the licensed producers. If you look at a national level, there are about 10 of them that are multi-state operators, and obviously their products don't cross state boundaries, but together they probably own, 70 to 90% of all licensed cultivation, manufacturing, retail. The next big wave is the brands, and how you establish yourself as a brand is going to be, until there's some change at the federal level, is going to continue to be a challenge. I like location-based advertising as a potential solution.
Yes.
And just add to that a little bit of friendly amendment, a couple of things. Number one is, look, we have seen in a very short order this extraordinary growth of the internet, all this new technology. We're all trying to grapple with it. And it goes in fits and starts. We saw Zuckerberg testify before Congress, and subsequent to that, they're pulling down all sorts of stuff because they're scared, they're worried at 100 levels. Political, not just with respect to cannabis and the like. One. Two, I just passed a bill on bots, dealing with both, again, trying to deal with some of the technology and the political context and the commercial context on bots, whether or not people are people and who you say you are. We're all grappling with that. I spent the last 3 months, and some of you may know about this, the privacy law that we passed in California. It's not perfect. It's full of holes to get something off the ballot. But again, beginning to deal with this ticklish issue that the great benefits the internet provides on the one hand, and yet some of the challenges it creates in a number of other areas. The other thing I would suggest with respect to branding in terms of location, I'm running for office in the San Fernando Valley, and my ads are simply limited to the San Fernando Valley. I don't advertise in Long Beach or some other place. I only advertise on cable, and the same thing with respect to my Facebook. So there are matters in that regard. But the only thing I would suggest, because we're inundated with the cannabis industry in California, which didn't exist legally in a way in the legislature, and there is, whether it's Canadians coming in or people from all over the place, there is such an absolute tsunami of interest. And the idea, because of the size, $8 to $20 billion we anticipated to be the largest agricultural crop in California, and the unbelievable opportunities to start building market share, building brand. There's huge risks that brands are taking, rolling up companies and focusing on California, where they're coming in from Canada or from all over the country that I've been able to see. Once I introduced this bill, I got a long line out my office of cannabis people that I never knew before, and all I was trying to do was to take a common sense a solution to this cash problem.
Thank you. Lillian, I got a question for you in your daily routines. What are some of the pitfalls some have or might experience when trying to start up a business in the cannabis industry? You represent the state of California, but you're based in Los Angeles, right? So I'm asking the question particularly after listening to Matt. Talk about what you're seeing on a daily basis. What are some of those pitfalls?
What I find when people come to me or call me is not knowing what permits they need. They're assuming they just need the basic permits like a retail business. But I have to let them know that each city has their own regulations, they have their own permit tree. And the information is not readily accessible because we have a tool on our website called CalGold, and we try to keep it updated as much as possible. We just have not inputted cannabis because every city or county is different on the permits. So it's not really accessible. I have called the business licensing department. They can't even tell me all the permits. So a lot of times I have to go a roundabout way to find out what permits are required by the city. The state is laid out. Only thing with the state is that sometimes I've had to make calls to find out where's the application in the pipeline, whose desk is it sitting on, why is it sitting there, let's move it through. But the locals are just not giving the information on the permits, and it can be frustrating if you don't know who to go to, who to call. So a lot of times I have those numbers the public don't have, and I can make those calls and find out. I need to know, are there any special building permits? Some cities are saying that they're going to require air permits. They don't want to smell anything. They want certain ventilation or extra money on ventilation. A lot of people don't know that. Then when they're like, I can't get my permits through. What's going on? So I tell them, this is your checklist. When you talk to me, I'm giving you a checklist of those agencies that you need to talk to, and I even tell my clients how to ask the questions. Don't just go in there giving, blah, blah, blah. I tell them, this is who you're going to talk to. This is the question you need to ask. If not sure, I call. I can call and ask those questions because some cities, like I say, are requiring certain environmental permits. You don't even know that. They're not letting you know. It's like it's a hidden gem or hidden secret. So this is the frustration a lot of people are having in trying to start their business.
Thanks, Elaine. Senator, I'm going to go back to the banking question. So we've kind of answered it. You've talked to it. Everybody here's kind of alluded to it. But I'm just curious. I wrote a note to myself to ask what compelled you. Why did you feel it necessary, of all the things on your desk, because I know you got a lot of stuff, why did you feel it's necessary for California to establish a cannabis banking system? You've alluded to it, but what was it that, in your mind, that initiated this whole activity with you?
What initiated it was literally my head hit the pillow when I read a story about how the treasurer and a couple other people wanted to start a government bank and do a study, and they called me on it. It's like, oh my God. And I knew, I actually, 1980, worked on a bank in Chinatown and kind of generally knew about how the system worked. And I said, come on, this is not a hard problem to solve. I just really kind of just raging common sense. Certainly the point that was alluded to in terms of public safety. reading stories in the paper about people getting knocked over in the head, grabbing a bunch of cash, and all the other challenges you'd begin to hear. It really was that simple, and a number of years ago I was chair of the Governance and Finance Committee that oversaw this stuff, but I really didn't pay a lot of attention to it, didn't think about it. I just saw, come on guys, this is easy, and I went and had my staff call up and say, well, how many state chartered banks are there? 135. Are there any closed banks? Because I see them closed up all the time, 918. We got to close banks. This is not hard to do. And I didn't explain this, but the concept is this, that you would get a check if you had one of these accounts, and the check would be drawn on it would be called a cannabis limited charter bank, and it would say this is not depositable in any other bank. It'd have a big restriction on it, so it was only used for that purpose, and everybody knew what the purposes were. So I thought it was pretty simple. And just by orders of magnitude, to give you context, I did a little research, my staff did research. I did 651 retailers so far in California have applied for licenses, 601 manufacturers, and about 2,500 cultivators have applied for licenses. And there's a whole level of tax and other kind of restrictions. And one of the problems that we're facing, quite candidly, is we in government made it so much more costly. I think it's like 40% more to go into business legally, let alone the banking side, than just to continue your current business. And so a lot of the businesses we expected to just come into the fold of the regulated world because of the difficulty in paying taxes, because of the risks, and because of the costs, that forget it, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I know how to do it. You know, it's
You
true.
can clap, it's okay.
I think these two last points interacted with each other. It's really expensive to start a cannabis business
Really
from scratch.
expensive.
It's really expensive to transition a cannabis business from gray to fully compliant. So like both of those transitions are really expensive, and it's not getting any cheaper, unfortunately.
Well, on that note, we're going to end up, because we're running a little late because of the wonderful traffic in Los Angeles. I know a lot of you fought your way to get here. I want to thank my panelists, Senator Hertzberg, Lillian, Jay, Matt. I want to leave you guys with a little bit of inspiration after hearing all this, because, you know, as you can hear, there are a lot of barriers to moving forward. It reminds me, it's one of my favorite quotes from President Franklin Roosevelt, who said, "Take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But by all means, try something." Thank you.
Can I just do one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Look, I don't know exactly how to do it. If you can contact my office, I really want to push hard and fast to get this thing through. I was pissed off that this bill got held. I didn't lose a single bill signed by the governor. I don't do that. But it got held because of the pressure of bureaucracies. So what I want to do is I want to get everybody under the sun that supports this concept now that it's been somewhat flushed out, and somehow put you into a coalition so that when I introduce this bill, I want to go to as many Democrats and Republicans in both houses, because you need 2/3 vote to get it done urgently, and give my office, give me your card or whatever. I want to put you on a list. I'll send you a copy of the bill when we produce it, which is already the same thing that's out there, and get me a support letter. I want 5,000 support letters. I want to overwhelm them with people around the state that say there's a need for this. And if you have ideas to how to change it, I'm open to it. I'm agnostic on it. I'm just trying to solve a problem, and I want to get it done quickly. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. Next panel at 11.